Clevenger. In a way, the CID man was pretty lucky, because on the outside of the hospital, the war was still going on. Men went mad and were rewarded with medals. All over the world, boys on every side of the bomb line were laying down their lives for what they had been told was their country, and no one seemed to mind, least of all the boys who were laying down their young lives. There was no end in sight. The only end in sight was Yossarian's own, and he might have remained in the hospital until doomsday had it not been for that patriotic Texan with his indefundable form jowls and his lumpy, rumple-headed, indestructible smile caked forever across the front of his face like the brim of a black 10-gallon hat. The Texan wanted everybody in the ward to be happy, but Yossarian and Dunbar, he was really very sick. But Yossarian couldn't be happy, even though the Texan didn't want him to be, because outside the hospital there was still nothing funny going on. The only thing going on was a war, and no one seemed to notice but Yossarian and Dunbar. And when Yossarian tried to remind people, they drew away from him and thought he was crazy. Even Clevenger, who should have known better but didn't, had told him he was crazy the last time they had seen each other, which was just before Yossarian had fled into the hospital. Clevenger had stared at him with apoplectic rage and indignation, and clawing the table with both hands, had shouted, "You're crazy!" "Clevenger, what do you want from people?" Dunbar had replied wearily above the noises of the officers' club. "I'm not joking," Clevenger persisted. "They're trying to kill me," Yossarian told him calmly. "No one's trying to kill you," Clevenger cried. "Then why are they shooting at me?" Yossarian asked. "They're shooting at everyone," Clevenger answered. "They're trying to kill everyone." "And what difference does that make?" Clevenger was already all the way, half out of his chair with emotion, his eyes and lips quivering and pale, as always occurred when he quarreled over principles in which he believed passionately. He would end up gasping furiously for air and blinking back bitter tears of conviction. There were many principles in which Clevenger believed passionately. He was crazy. "Who's they?" he wanted to know. "Who specifically do you think is trying to murder you?" "Every one of them," Yossarian told him. "Every one of whom?" "Every one of whom do you think?" "I haven't any idea." "Then how do you know they are?" "Because," Clevenger sputtered, and turned speechless with frustration. Clevenger really thought he was right, but Yossarian had proof, because strangers he didn't know shot at him with cannons every time he flew up into the air to drop bombs on them. And it wasn't funny at all. And if that wasn't funny, there were a lot of things that weren't even funnier. There was nothing funny about living life like a bum in a tent in Pianosa, between fat mountains behind him and a placid blue sea in front that could gulp down a person with a cramp in the twinkling of an eye and ship him back to the shore 3 days later, all charges paid, bloated, blue, putrescent water draining out through both cold nostrils. The tent he lived in stood right smack up against the wall of the shallow, dull-colored forest separating his own squadron from Dunbar's. Immediately alongside was the abandoned railroad ditch that carried the pipe that carried the aviation gasoline down the fuel trucks at the airfield. Thanks to Orr, his roommate, it was the most luxurious tent in the squadron. Each time Yossarian returned from one of his holidays in the hospital or rest leaves in Rome, he was surprised by some new comfort Orr had installed in his absence. Running water, wood-burning fireplace, cement floor. Yossarian had chosen the site, and he and Orr had raised the tent together. Orr, who was a grinning pygmy with pilot's wings and thick, wavy brown hair parted in the middle, furnished all the knowledge, while Yossarian, who was taller, stronger, broader, and faster, did most of the work. Just the two of them lived there, although the tent was big enough for 6. When summer came, or rolled up the flaps to allow a breeze that never blew to flush away the air baking inside. Immediately next door to Yossarian was Havermeyer, who liked peanut brittle and lived all by himself in the 2-man tent in which he shot tiny field mice every night with huge bullets from the .45 he had stolen from the dead man in Yossarian's tent. On the other side of Havermeyer stood the tent McWatt no longer shared with Clevenger, who had still not returned when Yossarian came out of the hospital. McWatt shared his tent now with Nately, who was away in Rome courting the sleepy whore he had fallen so deeply in love with there, who was bored with her work and bored with him too. McWatt was crazy. He was a pilot and flew his plane as low as he dared over Yossarian's tent as often as he could, just to see how much he could frighten him. And he loved to go buzzing with a wild, close roar over the wooden raft floating on empty oil drums out past the sandbar at the immaculate white beach where the men went swimming naked. Sharing a tent with a man who wasn't crazy wasn't easy, but Nately didn't care. He was crazy, too, and had gone every free day to work on the officers' club that Yossarian had not helped build. Actually, there were many officers' clubs that Yossarian had not helped build, but he was proudest of the one on Pianosa. It was a sturdy and complex monument to his powers of determination. Yossarian never went there to help until it was finished. Then he went there often, so pleased he was with the large, fine, rambling, shingled building. It was truly a splendid structure, and Yossarian throbbed with a mighty sense of accomplishment every time he gazed at it and reflected that none of the work that had gone into it was his. There were 4 of them seated together at a table in the officers' club the last time Clevenger had called each other crazy. They were seated in the back, near the crap table, on which Appleby always managed to win. Appleby was good at shooting crap, as he was at playing ping pong. As he was good at playing ping pong, as he was at everything else. Everything Appleby did, he did well. Appleby was a fair-haired boy from Iowa who believed in God, motherhood, and the American way of life without ever thinking about any of them. And everybody who knew him liked him. I hate that son of a bitch, Yossarian growled. The argument with Clevenger had begun a few minutes earlier when Yossarian had been unable to find a machine gun. It was a busy night. The bar was busy, the crap table was busy, the ping pong table was busy. The people Yossarian wanted to machine gun were busy at the bar, singing sentimental old favorites nobody else ever tired of. Instead of machine gunning them, he brought his heel down hard on the ping pong ball that came rolling toward him off the paddle of one of the 2 officers playing. That Yossarian, the 2 officers laughed, shaking their heads, and got another ball from the box on the shelf. That Yossarian, Yossarian answered them. Yossarian, Nately whispered cautioningly. You see what I mean? Asked Clevenger. The officers laughed again when they heard Yossarian mimicking them. That Yossarian, they said more loudly. That Yossarian, Yossarian echoed. Yossarian, please, Nately pleaded. Do you see what I mean? Asked Clevenger. He has antisocial aggressions. Oh, shut up, Dunbar told Clevenger. Dunbar liked Clevenger because Clevenger annoyed him and made time go slow. Appleby isn't even here, Clevenger pointed out triumphantly to Yossarian. Who said anything about Appleby? Yossarian wanted to know. Colonel Cathcart isn't here either. Who said anything about Colonel Cathcart? What son of a bitch do you hate then? What son of a bitch is here? I'm not going to argue with you, Clevenger decided. You don't know who you hate. Whoever's trying to poison me, Yossarian told him. Nobody's trying to poison you. They poisoned my food twice, didn't they? Didn't they put poison in my food during Ferrara and during the great big seas of Bologna? They put poison in everybody's food, Clevenger explained. And what difference does that make? It wasn't even poison, Clevenger cried heatedly, growing more empathetic as he grew more confused. As far back as Eucerin could recall, he explained to Clevenger with a patient smile, somebody was always hatching a plot to kill him. There were people who cared for him and people who didn't. And those who didn't hated him and were out to get him. And they hated him because he was a Syrian, because they couldn't touch him, he told Clevenger, because he had a sound mind in a pure body and was as strong as an ox. They couldn't touch him because he was Tarzan, Mandrake, Flash Gordon. He was Bill Shakespeare. He was Cain, Ulysses, the Flying Dutchman. He was Lot in Sodom, Deirdre of the Sorrows, Sweeney in The Nightingale, Among the Trees. He was Miracle Ingredient Z247. He was crazy! Clevenger interrupted, shrieking, that's what you are, crazy! Immense. I'm a real slam bang, honest to goodness, three-fisted humdinger. I'm a bona fide Superman. Superman, Clevenger cried. Superman! Superman! Yossarian corrected. Hey fellas, cut it out, Nately begged with embarrassment. Everybody's looking at us. You're crazy, Clevenger shouted vehemently, his eyes filling with tears. You got a Jehovah's complex. I think everyone is a Nathaniel. Clevenger arrested himself in mid-declamation suspiciously. Who's Nathaniel? Nathaniel? Who? Inquired Yossarian innocently. Clevenger skirted the trap neatly. You think everybody is Jehovah. You're no better than Raskolnikov. Who? Yes, Raskolnikov. Who? Raskolnikov. Who? I meant it. Who felt he could justify killing an old woman. No better than. Yes, justify, that's right, with an axe. And I can prove it to you. Grasping furiously for air, Clevenger enumerated Yossarian symptoms. An unreasonable belief that everyone around him was crazy. A homicidal impulse to machine gun strangers. Retrospective falsification, an unfounded suspicion that people hated him and were conspiring to kill him. But Yossarian knew he was right because, as he explained to Clevenger, to the best of his knowledge, he had never been wrong. Everywhere he looked was a nut. And all a sensible young gentleman like himself could do to maintain his perspective amid so much madness. And it was urgent that he did, for he knew his life was in peril. Yossarian eyed everyone he saw warily when he returned to the squadron from the hospital. Milo was away too, in Smyrna for the fig harvest. The mess hall ran smoothly in Milo's absence. Yossarian responded ravenously to the pungent aroma of spicy lamb, and while he was still in the cab of the ambulance, bouncing down along the knotted road that lay like a broken suspender between the hospital and the squadron, there was a shish kebab for lunch. Huge, savory hunks of spitted meat, sizzling like the devil over charcoal after marinating 72 hours in a secret mixture Milo had stolen from a crooked trader in the Levant, served with Iranian rice and asparagus tips parmesan, followed by cherry jubilee for dessert, and then steaming cups of fresh coffee with Benedictine and brandy. The meal was served in enormous helmings on damask tablecloths by the skilled Italian waiters Major de Coverley had kidnapped from the mainland and given to Milo. Yossarian gorged himself in the mess hall until he thought he would explode, and then sagged back in a contented stupor, his mouth filmy with a succulent residue. None of the officers in the squadron had ever eaten so well as they ate regularly in Milo's mess hall, and Yossarian wondered a while if it wasn't perhaps all worth it. But then he burped and remembered that they were trying to kill him, and he sprinted out of the mess hall wildly and ran looking for Doc Danica to have himself taken off combat duty and sent home. He found Doc Danica in the sunlight sitting on a high stool outside his tent. "50 missions, Doc Danica told him, shaking his head. The colonel wants 50 missions. But I've only got 44. Doc Danica was unmoved. He was a sad, bird-like man with a spatulate face and scrubbed, tapering features of a well-groomed rat. 50 missions, he repeated, still shaking his head. The colonel wants 50 missions.